A tray slammed against metal, sharp enough to cut through the quiet hum of Gate C-19. Every head turned. But the only one who didn't flinch was the man standing in the center of the commotion, his shoulders square, his expression unreadable. Ethan Coleman did not raise his voice. He didn't move. He simply looked at the supervisor who had barked at him moments earlier, the way a storm studies a coastline before deciding whether to break it apart. "If you want to challenge my clearance again," he said softly, "at least read the badge before you accuse me." His tone was level, but the air tightened the way it does when lightning flashes somewhere beyond the horizon. The supervisor, a broad-shouldered man who had spent too many years learning the wrong kind of authority, swallowed hard. He had assumed incorrectly that Ethan was ground crew trying to slip into restricted space. What he hadn't expected was the crisp uniform, the silver wings, or the card that clearly identified Ethan as a newly appointed first officer for Liberty West Airlines. And what he absolutely hadn't expected, as his eyes flicked to the second figure behind Ethan, was that there were two of them. Aaron Coleman stepped forward from the shadow of the boarding bridge, the twin brother nearly identical, but with sharper eyes, the kind that read danger before most people even felt it. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence was the kind that carried weight. The supervisor's face reddened. "I didn't realize you didn't look," Ethan replied. Then he walked past him, steady and composed boots, striking the carpet with the slow certainty of a man trained to navigate turbulence in the air and prejudice on the ground. Aaron followed, but not before giving the supervisor one final glance. Not angry, not wounded, merely disappointed. And for men like that supervisor, who had lived their lives mistaking prejudice for instinct, disappointment was somehow worse than rage. The twins moved deeper into the jet bridge, the hum of the terminal fading behind them. The smell of jet fuel drifted in, carried by a thin draft that slipped beneath the bridge walls. Aaron exhaled low and frustrated. "Didn't even last 5 minutes," he muttered. "Ignore it," Ethan murmured, though the tightness in his shoulders said he couldn't. "We've flown harder missions for the Air Force. Gate agents aren't going to break us." Aaron gave a wry half-smile, but didn't answer. Ethan always took the hit, quietly absorbing it into that deep place inside him. He never let anyone touch. Aaron carried it differently, like sand caught behind the teeth, irritating and grinding. The jet bridge opened into the early morning tarmac. Dawn hadn't broken yet, just a faint grey line along the eastern rim of the Denver Mountains. Floodlights washed the aircraft in hard white. A Liberty West Boeing 737 waited like a steel Sentinel engines, still and cold. Their aircraft, their first flight together. A milestone most pilots celebrated. But the Coleman brothers had learned early that some achievements carry a shadow before they earn light. Footsteps approached. Captain Henry Dawson emerged from the belly of the plane jacket, over his arm checklist in hand. Nearly 60 tall, composed, and carrying the sharp calm of a man who had survived mishaps most pilots whispered about in training halls. He took one look at the twins and understood everything without needing an explanation. "Rough morning already?" he asked. Ethan nodded. Henry lifted an eyebrow. "You two handled it better than most." Aaron shrugged. "We've had practice." Henry held their gazes for a long moment, reading the deeper meaning behind those words. The unspoken history, the things pilots like the Colemans rarely said aloud. "Inside," he finally said. "Better to start the day where we actually belong." They followed him up the narrow metal stairs and into the cockpit. The instant the door swung open, something shifted in Ethan's chest. The faint hum of electronics, the glow of standby screens, the smell of plastic warmed by instrument bulbs. The cockpit was the only place in the world where he felt fully aligned with himself. Yet even here, a thread of tension curled through the air, thin but unmistakable. Not from Henry, not from the machinery. Something else. A presence they hadn't met yet. A shadow in the story they hadn't stepped into. That presence revealed itself 30 seconds later. Linda Bradford stood at the flight deck entrance, arms folded, blazer pressed so sharply the seams looked like they'd cut skin. She'd been with Liberty West longer than most of the fleet had existed. 57 meticulous proud, and known for running her cabin with an iron spine and a frosted smile. She looked at Ethan first, then Aaron, then back again, trying to decide whether she was seeing double or seeing a problem. "Captain Dawson," she said, voice clipped. "I wasn't aware we had 2 new first officers today." "You don't," Henry replied. "First Officer Ethan Coleman. Second Officer Aaron Coleman. They're certified, fully cleared. They brief with me." Linda's smile tightened. "Of course. Just unexpected." Aaron caught the subtext instantly. Unexpected meant untraditional. Untraditional meant unwelcome. Ethan stepped past her without a word, but he felt her eyes follow him, measuring him not by his logbook, but by the assumptions she carried into every cabin she'd ever worked. Henry's voice cut through the tension. "Linda, they've earned their seats. Treat them as such." "Naturally, Captain." But her eyes said otherwise. As she turned and walked down the aisle, her heels struck the floor in hard, precise beats. A woman holding on to authority, like it was a life raft. Aaron whispered, "She's going to be a problem." Ethan adjusted the seat height, jaw set. "Let her try." But something in his tone betrayed a small crack, a tremor beneath the steel. Because for all his training, for all his discipline, even Ethan wasn't prepared for the storm forming quietly around them, a storm none of them could see yet. Not the twins, not Captain Dawson, and least of all Linda Bradford. Because miles away in a quiet suburb outside Denver, a man they all believed to be retired was packing a leather briefcase boarding pass tucked inside. Walter Coleman was headed to Seattle on the very flight his sons would operate, and he was bringing with him a secret the airline hadn't seen coming, a secret that would shift the balance of power before the wheels ever left the ground. The cabin lights glowed a muted amber as passengers drifted into the aisle, like shadows pulled forward by a silent current. From the cockpit doorway, Ethan watched them board, reading their faces the way pilots read weather patterns. Fatigue, mild irritation, the practiced indifference of seasoned travelers. But something else threaded beneath it all, a faint unease he couldn't name yet. Maybe it came from the sky, outside a heavy stretch of cloud, curling over Denver like a warning shroud. Or maybe it came from inside the aircraft itself, from the way Linda Bradford moved through the cabin. She walked with a rigid grace, chin-high eyes, scanning each row as though inspecting a formation rather than welcoming passengers. Her smile flickered in brief mechanical intervals, never touching her eyes, never warm enough to thaw the cold knot forming in Ethan's stomach. Aaron sensed it too. He always did. He leaned close, keeping his voice low. "She's already keyed up." "Something happened before we got here." Ethan nodded, absorbing the observation silently. Linda was the type who wore tension, like perfume subtle to the untrained, overwhelming to those who knew where to look. A man in a worn leather jacket stood at row 9, struggling to fit a duffel bag into the overhead bin. Linda reached him in 3 sharp strides. "So that bag should have been checked. You're blocking the aisle." The man glanced back, startled. "I just need a second." "The zipper. Other passengers are waiting," she snapped. "Please step aside." Her tone cut through the cabin, brittle and echoing. Another flight attendant, a young man named Devon, stepped between them with a gentle but firm tone. "I can help you with that, sir." "No problem." Linda's jaw tightened. She disliked being circumvented. Ethan filed the moment away without expression. On an airplane, conflicts rarely appeared all at once. They seeped subtle and steady until something finally snapped. Captain Dawson approached from the rear galley, his calm presence shifting the air. "Everything all right up front?" he asked. Linda straightened instantly. "Smooth as ever, Captain. Just passengers moving slow this morning." Henry's gaze flicked toward the bin, toward Devon, helping the man, then back to Linda. He said nothing, but the silence itself carried weight. Boarding continued. A teenager with braces, a mother soothing a baby, a man in a business suit tapping on his phone, as though time might outrun him if he didn't tap fast enough. Life condensed into a narrow aluminum tube. Then came the moment that pushed the air tighter. A woman entered her cane, tapping softly against the jet bridge threshold. Her hair was silver, neatly curled, her face folded gently with years. She offered her boarding pass to Linda with a tired smile. "Morning, dear. Could you tell me which side has seat 14, oi?" "My eyes aren't what they used to be." Linda's smile sharpened. "Your pass is upside down," she said bluntly. 14A is to the left." The woman's cheeks colored, embarrassed. Devon stepped in again. "Ma'am, I'm heading that way." "Let me take you." The woman's shoulders softened with relief, but Linda's eyes hardened, a quiet irritation growing in the small spaces between gestures. From the cockpit, Aaron muttered, "She's cracking." Ethan didn't answer. His gaze had fixed on a figure entering the jet bridge. For an instant, the breath hitched in his chest. Walter Coleman stepped into view. His father looked different than Ethan remembered. Not older, not weaker, just heavy, as though carrying the weight of something unsaid. He wore a charcoal coat, rain specked at the shoulders. His steps were steady, but measured like a man timing each movement to avoid trembling. Aaron followed Ethan's line of sight and froze. "He didn't tell us." "He never does," Ethan murmured. Walter passed through the boarding door unnoticed by most, but not by Linda. She stopped him with a hand just firm enough to show she intended control. "Sir, your ID and boarding pass, please." He offered them without a hint of irritation, though the slight tremble of his right hand didn't escape Ethan's attention. Linda inspected the pass longer than necessary, her brow creasing. "Your seat is in first class," she said, tapping the boarding pass. "But your ticket has been manually updated. Did someone change it for you?" "My assistant arranged the travel," Walter replied quietly. "I'm not sure what was adjusted." Linda pursed her lips. "Manual modifications require verification." She pulled out a tablet, scanning his pass with deliberate slowness. "Have a seat in the waiting area until I confirm." Walter blinked, surprised. "I didn't realize there was a problem." "There could be. I'll let you know." Ethan felt something hot press against his ribs. Not anger. Something colder, sharper. Before he could step forward, Henry appeared beside him, sensing the tension. "Stay put," the captain warned gently. "Don't make assumptions yet." But the assumption was already forming. Walter, who hated drawing attention, who avoided conflict even when justified, stood quietly while Linda treated him like a security risk rather than a paying passenger. A small cough escaped him, subtle but tight in the chest, not loud enough for anyone else to note, loud enough for Ethan to feel the floor tilt. Emily, another attendant, hurried over. "Linda First Class is full on this flight. We really need to start pre-departure checks." "Then we must verify passengers quickly," Linda said without looking up. Emily lowered her voice. "He's elderly. Let him sit while you check." Linda shot her a look of cold reprimand. Procedure is procedure. Ethan could read the whole scene like a flight plan, unraveling Linda, enforcing rules, inconsistently tension rippling through the crew, Walter shrinking inward, his pride bending. And underneath that, a second problem, his father's health, wasn't right. Ethan's muscles tightened. Something was off. Very off. Finally, Linda handed Walter the pass. "It's fine. Find your seat." Her tone made it sound anything but fine. Walter thanked her softly, though his voice was rough around the edges. He walked toward first class, gripping the seatbacks lightly as he passed. Aaron exhaled through his teeth. "She treats him like that, seriously." Ethan didn't answer. His mind replayed the tremor, the cough, his father's eyes bright but dulled by something unknown. Henry stepped between them. "Whatever's happening here stays outside the cockpit until we're airborne." "Understood," Ethan nodded, but the knot in his chest didn't loosen. Walter reached his seat, lowering himself slowly, with a stiffness Ethan had never seen. As he settled in, he pressed 2 fingers to his temple, wincing just slightly, as though a memory or a pain had crawled out from somewhere deep inside him. Linda breezed past without noticing, but Ethan noticed everything, every detail, every sound, every breath his father took. Something was happening, something far deeper than a minor boarding conflict. And as the last passengers settled and the cabin doors inched toward closing, Ethan felt the unease shift into certainty. This flight was not going to unfold the way anyone expected. Not Henry, not Linda, not even Walter himself. Because the Coleman family had always carried secrets like dormant storms, and today, at 30,000 feet, one of those storms was about to break open. The cabin door sealed with a hollow thud, a sound that usually steadied Ethan's nerves. Today it rang differently, like the lid closing on a box full of things meant to stay buried. He slid into his seat, adjusted the harness, and ran his fingers across the cool metal of the throttle quadrant. Familiar. Solid. A place where control meant something. But his pulse would not settle. Captain Dawson's voice broke through the quiet. "Pre-flight checklist when you're ready." Ethan swallowed, nodded, and began reading down the panel. His voice was steady, but his lungs felt tight. Aaron mirrored every call-out flawlessly, though his eyes kept flicking toward the cabin door. As the checklist wrapped, Henry studied them both, his gaze shrewd. "Whatever's happening, compartmentalize. For now." It wasn't a reprimand. It was a lifeline. Ethan took it, or tried to. A faint chime sounded cabin crew requesting entry. Henry pressed the unlock toggle. Linda stepped in with her clipboard pressed tightly to her chest. The overhead lighting sharpened every line in her face. "Captain, we have a discrepancy in the passenger manifest. A first-class meal count is off by 1. Henry blinked, unimpressed. "And I need to confirm the correct head count before pushback," she said, eyes darting slyly toward Ethan and Aaron, assessing them again without pretending not to. "Accuracy matters." Aaron leaned back, lacing his fingers tone flat. "We're pilots, not caterers." Linda stiffened. "I wasn't addressing you." Henry's patience thinned. "Linda, the galley teams double-check that before boarding even starts. If you have a concern, resolve it quietly. We're busy preparing for departure." Her jaw flexed. She lowered her clipboard. "Yes, Captain." But she didn't move. She was watching Ethan, studying him with a strange sort of restraint, like she wanted to say something but wasn't sure she should. Ethan finally met her gaze. "Is there something else?" Miss Bradford, her lips parted closed again, then tightened. "One of the passengers in first-class seat 1A. He may need additional assistance." "He seems unwell." Aaron straightened. Ethan's stomach dropped. Their father was in 1A. Before Ethan could speak, Linda added, "I offered water." He declined, said he was fine. But his hands were shaking, and he looked pale. The world narrowed into a sharp point. Henry looked from Linda to Ethan, then to Aaron, recognition dawning, though he didn't yet grasp the whole truth. "Do either of you know him?" Ethan kept his tone neutral. "He looks familiar." Aaron didn't bother pretending. "He's our dad." Linda blinked, her surprise genuine for the first time since they'd met. She looked between them, confusion flickering with something else, something softer than judgment. Concern, maybe. It didn't last long. Henry exhaled. "All right. Then we do this by procedure. If he's ill, we address it. If not, we fly." Linda hesitated at the door. "Should I notify ground medical?" Ethan thought of the tremor in Walter's hand, the strain in his breath, the way he'd clutched the seat back. But his father hated being fussed over, especially publicly. "No," Ethan said quietly. "Not yet. I'll check on him after takeoff." Linda studied him another beat, and for once she didn't argue. She nodded, stepped out, and sealed the cockpit door behind her. Henry turned fully toward Ethan and Aaron. "If he needs a diversion, mid-flight, will he tell you?" No, Ethan admitted. "Then we'll monitor cabin reports closely," Henry said. "Focus on flying. Let me worry about the rest." It was a generous offer, more generous than Ethan expected. He lowered his eyes in gratitude, but his chest still burned. Because something was wrong with his father, and instinct told him it wasn't an isolated moment. It was the beginning of something larger. The engines roared to life as the pushback tug latched. Vibrations hummed through the fuselage. Ethan let the sound ground him. Procedure was his refuge now. They taxied to the runway, Denver's lights twinkling across the foothills. Clouds pressed low, the wind picking up in restless bursts. Liberty West 301 cleared for takeoff runway, 17 left. Ethan eased the thrust forward. The engines surged. The aircraft began its determined sprint across the concrete, but just as the wheels left the ground, a voice crackled through the intercom. Emily's voice, brittle with nerves. "Captain, it's Emily in the forward galley. We have a situation with a passenger in first class." Henry's hand flew to the comm button. "What kind of situation?" A beat. A shaky inhale. "It's the gentleman in 1A. He fainted. The cockpit froze. The engines roared, the aircraft climbing, but inside the flight deck, everything stilled, suspended on a single breath. Ethan's fingers tightened on the yoke. Aaron whispered. Dad Henry's voice remained steady, carved from bedrock. "Emily, secure the cabin. Check his pulse. Use oxygen. Report back in 30 seconds. The channel clicked off. No one spoke. The plane pierced a layer of cloud. The cabin lights dimmed as the sky darkened around them. Ethan's heartbeat thudded in his throat, each pulse a warning bell. The climb felt too slow, the minutes too long. The cockpit too small to hold the fear pressing in on all sides. Finally, Emily's voice returned, strained and trembling. "Captain, he's conscious again, breathing shallow, sweating heavily. He says he's fine, but he's not. I think this could be cardiac." Aaron bowed his head, knuckles whitening. Henry didn't hesitate. "We divert. Closest airport with cardiac response capability." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Seattle has better hospitals." Henry's voice cut like steel. "He doesn't have time for Seattle." Ethan looked out the window, the dark stretch of Rockies rising like jagged silhouettes. Turbulent air waiting ahead, a different storm forming behind, and in the center of both storms, his father. He felt the decision before he made it. "Give me the aircraft," he said quietly. Henry didn't question. He simply nodded and released the controls. Ethan's hands settled on the yoke, steady but burning. "Set course for Salt Lake City," he said. Best cardiac response within reach. Aaron's voice cracked, barely audible. "Ethan, we're not losing him," Ethan whispered. The plane banked, slicing through the clouds as if cutting open the sky itself. Back in first class, Walter Coleman pressed a hand to his chest, breathing through the pain, forcing his mind to stay sharp. Emily hovered beside him, eyes wide with fear, unaware that the man she was trying to save wasn't just a passenger. He was the one person who could change the fate of Liberty West Airlines, but only if he survived the next hour. The storm line hit harder than forecast, punching the aircraft with a sudden pocket of rough air that rattled the overhead bins and sent a ripple of alarm through the cabin. Ethan steadied the controls, reading the wind shear like a second language. Behind him, Aaron monitored instruments in quick, sharp motions, every glance toward the cabin door, a silent prayer that no one would open it. Captain Dawson braced one hand on the back of his seat as the aircraft jolted again. "Easy, Ethan. Ride the edges. Don't fight the gusts head-on." I know Ethan answered, though his voice carried a tightness that wasn't about turbulence. "I've got it." He did, but barely. Henry's eyes softened with a caution Ethan didn't want. "We can switch off if you need a break." Ethan didn't look back. "I need to get him on the ground." A brief, heavy silence followed. Henry said nothing more. The radio crackled Salt Lake Center, clearing them for expedited descent, just as another shudder ran through the fuselage. Oxygen masks trembled slightly in their compartments, not enough to deploy, but enough for passengers to glance upward, with dread in their faces. This wasn't a routine flight anymore. The tension had shifted. Everyone felt it. In first class, Emily crouched beside Walter as he gripped the armrests, knuckles, pale breath shallow. His eyes were open, but unfocused, staring not at the cabin, but at something far inside himself. "Coleman, can you hear me?" He tried to answer, but the words broke apart in the back of his throat. Linda stood nearby, stiff, and unsure, her authority faltering. For years she had walked cabins like a commander, but crises were different. Crises stripped off the uniform and left the person underneath exposed. She looked at Walter's face, the pallor, the tremor, and something cracked in her. A memory, maybe. A face she'd once held the hand of in an ER waiting room. The man she lost before she knew how to save him. She swallowed hard. "Emily, get the emergency medical kit." Emily hesitated. "Shouldn't we wait for the captain's instruction?" Linda's voice steadied. "We don't wait for permission to save a life." For the first time that morning, she sounded human instead of hardened. Back in the cockpit, Ethan adjusted trim as the plane entered a smoother corridor of air. but his hands didn't relax. His mind raced, calculating descent rates, approach, speed, terrain, clearance, but underneath all of it, fear pulsed like a second heartbeat. He knew cardiac events. He'd seen them in uniform. Men strong enough to carry 100 pounds of gear through desert heat could fall in seconds. There were no guarantees. Henry picked up the cabin interphone. Forward attendants. Status update. Static hissed. Then Emily's voice came through taut with urgency. "Captain." He's conscious but fading. "We need paramedics on standby. And Captain, there's something else." Henry's eyes narrowed. "Go ahead." Emily hesitated, then said it. He asked for Ethan. Aaron's breath hitched. Ethan went still, the aircraft flying itself for one long moment. Henry ended the call. "I'll handle the approach. You talk to him when we land." "No," Ethan said quietly. "I need to get him there myself." Henry studied him. "You're flying injured." "It doesn't matter." "Yes, it does." Ethan's voice hardened. "He's my father. I'm landing this plane." Henry didn't argue. He simply watched the young man beside him and understood Ethan wasn't driven by emotion alone. He was driven by something older, heavier, something men carried before they learned to name their feelings. Duty. They began final descent. The Rockies loomed dark beyond the windows, jagged silhouettes carving up the sky. Salt Lake City flickered far below, a sprawl of lights, waiting like a muted promise. Ethan configured flaps in deliberate steps, his motions fluid but clenched with urgency. "Speed set," Aaron said, voice low. "Check," Ethan replied. The aircraft dipped beneath the cloud layer, and the runway lights stretched out a thin, fragile path through darkness. Ethan locked onto them with fierce precision, but inside the cabin, another storm was brewing. Linda returned with the medical kit, snapping it open. Her hands were efficient, practiced. She wrapped a pulse oximeter on Walter's finger, checked blood pressure, placed an oxygen mask gently over his face. He winced. "You're okay," she murmured. "Stay with us." Walter's eyes fluttered open. They focused on her, not with fear, but with something unexpectedly sharp, a strange recognition. "You," he whispered. Linda blinked. "So you were." He swallowed breath, hitching. "You were the one at the gate." She stiffened. Beside her, Emily froze. "Linda." But Linda shook her head sharply. "Focus on him." Walter's gaze drifted away as his eyelids sagged. Emily leaned closer in panic. "Mr. Coleman," Sir Linda pressed her fingers against his wrist, feeling the thready pulse. A whisper escaped her lips, something closer to a confession than a report. "He needs a hospital now," the intercom chimed Henry's voice, sounding through the cabin. "Flight attendants prepare for emergency landing." Ethan lowered the aircraft toward the runway, the descent steeper than normal, but within safe limits. He could feel every vibration, every crosswind push, every second ticking against his father's pulse. 200 feet, Aaron called. Ethan's jaw clenched. "Hold steady! 100!" The aircraft dipped. A gust shoved it sideways. Ethan corrected instantly. 50! The runway rushed upward. Ethan flared. The wheels struck pavement with a solid, gripping thump. Reversers roared. Lights streaked past in blinding lines. Ethan kept the nose straight through sheer will. They slowed more, finally rolled to a crawl. Passengers burst into applause before realizing the atmosphere was wrong. Too tense, too silent. The aircraft stopped. The doors opened. Paramedics stormed in. Emily waved them forward. Row 1. Hurry Walter slumped sideways as they lifted him, oxygen mask slipping. Linda looked away, jaw trembling. As paramedics moved him down the aisle, Ethan unbuckled, bolted from the cockpit, and met them halfway. Walter's eyes fluttered open for a breath. A single breath. "Son, don't let," his voice failed. Ethan leaned closer. "Dad, I'm here." Walter's hand lifted weakly. "Don't let them take it." Then his eyes rolled back, and the paramedics rushed him out. Aaron grabbed Ethan's arm. "We go with them." But Ethan didn't move. Not yet. He turned slowly toward the cabin, toward Linda, toward every pair of watching eyes. Something about his father's broken sentence echoed louder than the alarm still ringing in Ethan's ears. Don't let them take it. Take what Linda swallowed, avoiding his gaze. Ethan took one step toward her, then another, and the tremor in her jaw told him something he wasn't prepared for. She knew. She knew exactly what Walter meant, and whatever it was, it had already begun. Passengers sat frozen in their seats long after the paramedics disappeared down the jet bridge with Walter's stretcher. A silence hung inside the cabin, thick, unsettled electric. Not the kind born from fear, but from awareness. Everyone felt it now. Something had cracked open mid-air. Something no one could name yet, but everyone sensed. Ethan stood in the aisle, breathing hard, pulse still thundering from the landing. He looked nothing like the composed first officer who had boarded the flight earlier. His face was pale jaw, tight eyes, sharp with questions he wasn't ready to voice. Aaron hovered a step behind him, torn between following the paramedics and staying with his brother. Linda Bradford stood near the forward galley hands, locked around the edges of a service cart she wasn't even using. Her posture was rigid, her expression pinched, but something in her eyes flickered. Guilt, recognition, fear. All layered together. Henry Dawson emerged from the cockpit, adjusting his captain's jacket with slow, deliberate movements. He scanned the cabin, reading the currents the way only a veteran pilot could. He approached quietly, stopping beside Ethan. "You should go with your father," he said. Ethan didn't move. "Not yet." Henry lowered his voice. "This isn't the moment for anything else." Ethan looked at him, and Henry caught it, the barely contained fury under the surface. Not wild. Controlled. Focused. What did he mean? Ethan asked softly. "Don't let them take it." Take what Aaron exhaled shakily. Dad wouldn't say that unless something was wrong. Something big. Henry opened his mouth but closed it again. He didn't have answers, only instincts. And they told him this: whatever Walter Coleman had been involved in it didn't start today. It started long before the flight departed Denver. A flight attendant called from the back, her voice tight. "Captain, some passengers are requesting to deplane." "Of course," Henry answered, turning away. "Let's get them off calmly. No announcements yet." He glanced at Ethan. "Stay as long as you need. But get to that hospital before it's too late." Ethan nodded, but didn't move. Passengers filed out slowly. Some offered murmured sympathy. Others sneaked curious glances at Ethan and Aaron, piecing together what they had overheard. No one dared approach Linda. She had wrapped herself in silence, a barrier no one wanted to penetrate. When the cabin thinned to only crew, Linda finally spoke. "I didn't know he was your father." The words dropped flat fragile, like glass bottles, set too close to an edge. Ethan turned toward her. His face was unreadable, but his stillness carried weight. "You didn't need to know," he said. "He was a passenger." That should have been enough. Linda's throat bobbed. She tried to keep her expression neutral, but something in her composure wavered. "I didn't mistreat him. I followed procedure. The manual changes on the ticket, those always require extra checks." Aaron stepped forward, voice low and cold. "Funny. Because you don't check manual updates when the passenger looks like someone you expect in first class." Linda flinched. "That is not fair." Ethan cut in quiet but firm. "Fairness is not your strength, Miss Bradford." Her breath stuttered. For the first time, she looked unsteady. "Look," she said softer. "Whatever is happening here, I'm not involved." It wasn't what she said, but the way she said it. Too carefully, too quickly, as if she had rehearsed the sentence long before uttering it. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Involved in what Linda shut down instantly. Nothing. I don't know anything. But she did. Ethan could see it. A flicker behind the shield. Henry re-entered the scene, placing a steadying hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Let's step off the aircraft. We can handle crew matters later." Crew matters. The phrase carried a gravity everyone felt. As they walked down the jet bridge, Linda stayed behind, leaning her weight on the galley counter. Her breath trembled. She pressed her hand to her eyes, whispering, "This is too soon. Too soon." Ethan heard it. The words threaded through him like ice water. He turned sharply. "What did you say?" Linda straightened, startled. "Nothing. Go. Be with your father." He stared at her for 2 long seconds, then pivoted away, but the poison seed had already been planted. Too soon, meaning something was expected. Something was planned. Outside the aircraft, the airport lights bleached the concrete in harsh yellow beams. The paramedics were gone. Only streaks of water on the floor, melted ice from the stretcher, and the distant echo of hurried footsteps remained. Ethan moved toward the exit, but Henry blocked him gently. "Ethan, 1 minute." Ethan halted only out of respect. Henry's tone lowered firm. "Before you go to the hospital, answer me this. Did your father ever mention anything about the airline? Anything involving risk-conflict contracts, disputes with the board?" Ethan shook his head. "No. He retired. Years ago." Henry inhaled slowly. Retirement doesn't look like that. Like what Henry held Ethan's gaze, like a man who knew something might happen to him today. Oren stepped closer, anxiety tightening his voice. "You think this wasn't a medical emergency?" "I think," Henry said carefully, "that your father warned you mid-collapse. People don't do that unless the danger isn't only inside their body." A chill rolled through both brothers. Emily emerged from the aircraft, wiping her hands nervously on her uniform. "Captain Dawson, there's something else I should tell you." Henry motioned for her to continue. When Mr. Coleman fainted before he asked for Ethan, he said another sentence. She hesitated. He said, "Tell them I know." Ethan felt his stomach drop. Aaron closed his eyes, whispering, "Know what?" Emily shook her head. "I don't know." But he was scared. Not for himself. For you. They all stood in stunned silence as the terminal noise faded into a distant hum. Then Henry spoke the single sentence that changed everything. "Ethan, Aaron, whatever your father knew, someone else knows he knew it." And as Ethan and Aaron turned toward the hospital, neither noticed Linda, standing near the jet bridge door, watching them leave with a haunted expression. Her fingertips trembling, her lips pressed shut against a truth she'd sworn not to speak. Not yet. Not until the moment she feared most finally arrived. Too soon, she had whispered. Meaning one thing. Something was coming. Something big. And the man who tried to warn them was now fighting for his life. Ethan and Aaron moved through the terminal, like men walking inside a dream they couldn't wake from. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, too bright, too cold, too steady for the chaos inside their chests. Every step felt wrong. Too slow, too heavy, too far from the hospital where their father lay fighting for breath. But Henry had insisted they stop in a private waiting room near the crew lounge 1 minute, he'd said, but his tone made clear it would not be optional. The room was empty when they entered, quiet, except for the low hum of an aging air conditioner. Frosted windows blurred the runway lights into smears of gold. Ethan sat but didn't lean back, elbows on his knees, hands clasped so tightly the knuckles whitened. Aaron paced in tight circles, running a hand through his hair until it stood in disordered peaks. Henry entered last, closing the door gently behind him. His expression had shifted from operational calm to something older, heavier, a look that said he'd lived long enough to recognize certain patterns, the kind of patterns men didn't talk about unless forced to. He took a seat across from them. "You both need to hear this before you go to the hospital." Aaron stopped pacing. "If this is about flight reports, it's not about that Henry cut in. It's about your father." Ethan's jaw worked. "You know something." Henry sighed, leaning back as if assembling decades of scattered memories. "When I was a younger pilot early in my career, your father wasn't retired. He worked high up at Liberty West." "That's impossible," Aaron said. "Dad said he left aviation before we were even born." "Left is not the same as forgotten," Henry replied. "Your father was the kind of man people didn't stop talking about quietly, even after he stepped away." Ethan leaned forward. "What aren't you telling us?" Henry hesitated. Then he tried to expose something involving the board. The silence sharpened. Aaron froze, anger flaring instantly. Expose what Henry's gaze slid to the frosted window, as if searching for the right words. Financial misconduct, safety-compliant shortcuts, rumors of altered maintenance logs. It was never proven, but he'd come close to revealing names. And then he disappeared from the industry. Ethan's breath trembled, barely audible. Disappeared or was pushed out. Henry met Ethan's eyes with a long, heavy look that supplied the answer. Aaron sat down abruptly, the chair scraping. "You're saying the same people who forced him out might want to silence him." "Now I don't know," Henry said, rubbing his forehead. "I don't want to believe that." But his message, "Don't let them take it, and tell them I know," that doesn't sound like a man afraid of dying. That sounds like a man afraid of being stopped. Ethan's pulse hammered in his temples. Why now? Why this flight? Why today? Henry sighed. Because some board members resigned last week. Quietly, no announcements, and 2 new executives joined overnight. The kind of moves companies make when something big is about to break. Aaron stared at him, stunned. But Dad's been out of the loop for years. Henry shook his head slowly. Not as out of it as you think. Men like your father don't stop watching the things they helped build. A knock rapped at the door. Emily poked her head inside, face pale. "I'm sorry, I know I shouldn't interrupt, but there's someone here asking for you." Before anyone responded, Linda Bradford stepped into the room. Her expression wasn't combative now. Not stern, not superior, just tired, worn, afraid. Aaron stood instantly. "What do you want?" Linda didn't look at him. She looked at Ethan. "We need to talk," she said softly. "All of us." Henry rose. "Linda, this isn't the time." "It is," she cut in quietly. "Because this didn't start today. And if you walk out that door without knowing the whole picture, you're going in blind." Ethan's straightened voice low, but razor sharp. What picture Linda swallowed, gathering courage she clearly wasn't used to showing. "Your father wasn't on this flight by coincidence. Someone requested his ticket be changed, manually." Aaron frowned. "Changed by who?" Linda shook her head. "The boarding system flags manual edits. Names are stored. Approvals are stored." She hesitated. and the name on the change request wasn't mine, or gate control, or a standard supervisor. Then whose was it? Ethan asked. Her voice dropped to a whisper. A member of the corporate board. The room snapped into stillness. Henry stepped closer. Which member? Linda's eyes darted to the floor, then up again. I'll tell you. But you need to understand, I didn't know who your father was, and I didn't know what they were planning. I only knew his ticket was being routed differently. Higher priority. Higher scrutiny. Aaron's fists tightened. Why would a board member interfere with a single passenger? Linda inhaled shakily. Because your father contacted them last night. Ethan froze. His breath caught in his throat. He sent an email, Linda said. One I wasn't meant to see, but it was forwarded to crew dispatch by mistake. What did it say? Henry demanded. Linda's face twisted with conflict. It said he had documents, proof about what happened 22 years ago, about why he really left Liberty West. A numbness washed through Ethan's limbs. Aaron sat down again, as though his knees gave out. 22 years ago, that was before we were born. Linda nodded. It also said she whispered that he planned to hand those documents to someone on this flight. Ethan's throat tightened. Linda looked directly at him. You. Air rattled through the vent overhead, the only sound in the room. Henry exhaled harshly. If that's true, this wasn't a medical emergency. Aaron's voice was thin, breaking. This was a warning. But Linda shook her head. No, she said quietly. Not a warning. She stepped forward, trembling. A message. She lifted a folded slip of paper, crumpled, smudged with sweat retrieved from somewhere she'd kept hidden. A message your father left with me, she whispered, voice cracking. Just in case. Ethan stared at the paper, unable to breathe. Linda held it out. You need to read this, she said, and you need to read it before anyone else does. Ethan didn't reach for the note at first. His hand hovered in the air, suspended between dread and necessity. The room felt too small, too bright, the air conditioner, humming like a warning signal only he could hear. Linda stood frozen arm, extended the slip of paper, trembling between her fingers. The confidence she'd worn all morning had drained from her face, leaving nothing but exhaustion, and something dangerously close to remorse. Take it, she whispered, before someone realizes it's missing. That word missing hit harder than Ethan expected. He finally took the note. The paper was still warm from Linda's hand, soft at the edges, as though someone had held it too long. Someone who hadn't wanted to let go. His father. Ethan unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was rushed, uneven, nothing like the precise script Walter Coleman used for every grocery list and birthday card. This hand belonged to a man fighting time, fighting fear, fighting someone. 2 lines sprawled across the page, jagged and frantic. If anything happens, protect the files. Trust no one on the board. Remember Denver. The letters slanted, pressed too hard, ink blotting in the corners where the pen hesitated. Aaron leaned in. What does that mean, Denver? We grew up here. Henry paled. Even his veteran calm wavered. Denver wasn't just a city to your father. It was where the Liberty West audit collapsed. The year everything changed. Ethan stared at the paper as if it might erupt into flames. Protect the files. Trust no one on the board. Remember Denver. His father had been preparing for this. Not today. Not this morning. For years. Linda spoke quietly. There's more. Aaron's head snapped up. More? She nodded, swallowing hard. Your father asked to speak to me before boarding. He seemed confused, off balance. At first I thought he was just tired, then he told me something made him come on this flight. Something urgent. Something dangerous. Henry tensed. And you didn't say anything, Linda's voice quivered. I didn't know what to do. Anger flared in Aaron's eyes, sharp and quick. You knew he was in trouble. I didn't know he would collapse. Linda's voice cracked. I thought it was just nerves. He kept repeating that he needed to talk to his sons privately, that someone was watching him, that he might not get another chance. The room burned into silence. Ethan stood so abruptly, his chair screeched across the floor. We're wasting time. He's in a hospital, fighting for his life, and we're sitting here piecing together riddles. Henry placed a firm hand on his shoulder. And if you walk into that hospital without knowing what you're walking into, you risk more than missing answers. You risk whoever your father feared finding you first. Ethan's pulse thudded heavy and uneven. What does that even mean? It means, Henry said, voice dropping to a near growl, that if your father was silenced, your words, not mine, the people responsible won't stop just because he's unconscious. Ethan stared at Henry, breath trapped somewhere between panic and fury. Linda took a shaky step forward. He also said something else. Something I didn't understand at the time. What her voice softened, as though repeating a confession. He said your flight numbers were wrong. Aaron frowned. Wrong how he said the roster was tampered with. Henry jolted. Tampered fear crawled up Ethan's spine. Linda nodded. You weren't supposed to fly together today. Someone switched the assignments. Aaron went still, realization slamming into him. They wanted us together. But why, Ethan asked, his voice barely audible. Linda hesitated, then whispered, to make sure both of you were on the same plane. The fluorescent light above them flickered once long enough for everyone to feel a shift in the room's gravity. Henry ran a hand over his mouth. Good God, Aaron's voice cracked. Are we targets? Not you, Linda said. Your father. But whoever came for him didn't expect him to collapse before them. Collapse, Ethan muttered, staring at nothing. Or was made to. The idea hung in the air like smoke. Henry's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, stiffened, and showed it to Ethan, a short message from airport security. Medical emergency still under evaluation. Possible interference with on-board medication. Police notified. The world tilted. Ethan grabbed the arm of the chair to steady himself. Interference. Someone tampered with his meds. He doesn't take anything but... He froze. Aaron whispered. The supplements he carries. The same bottle Ethan had seen in Walter's hand the night before. The same bottle he'd watched him pack. Henry's voice lowered. Boys, you need to get to that hospital now. But not alone. Why not alone? Ethan snapped. Linda answered instead. Because someone on this airport staff had access to your father's travel details, his medical notes, and his itinerary. Someone who knew he'd be here this morning. Someone who changed his ticket. She paused. And if they tampered with his medication, they may already know he didn't die on the plane. Aaron felt ice pool beneath his ribs. Ethan felt something colder resolve. He tucked the note into his jacket pocket like a weapon he never wanted to use. Henry straightened. I'm going with you. Security is on standby. The hospital's being alerted. Linda stepped back, hands trembling. I'll stay here. In case someone comes looking for information. Aaron narrowed his eyes. Why would they come to you? Linda looked at the door, then at the floor. Because she whispered, I wasn't supposed to give you the message. Ethan stared at her realization, dawning. You knew the board was involved. Linda nodded, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes. I didn't know how far it went, but I knew enough to be scared. Henry ushered the twins toward the door. We move now. Whatever's happening, it's bigger than a medical emergency. The moment Ethan crossed the threshold, his phone buzzed, a number he didn't recognize. One sentence. Your father wasn't the target. Ethan stopped dead. Aaron stepped closer. What is it? Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper, hollow and cold. It says we were, and the hallway lights seemed to dim as the truth settled over them like a falling shadow. The hallway outside the waiting room felt wrong the moment Ethan stepped into it. Too quiet, too still, too empty for a busy Denver terminal. Sound usually bled through these corridors in layers, rolling suitcases, gate calls, security radios. But now it was as if the air held its breath, as if the walls themselves were listening. He reread the message on his phone, the words burning hotter with each pass. Your father wasn't the target. You were. No signature, no sender, no timestamp. Just a threat sharpened into a whisper. Aaron leaned over his shoulder, reading it once, twice, his face draining. How would they get your number? Ethan's voice was ice, the same way they got his. Henry pulled the twins toward him, dropping his voice. Phone's off. Now. Ethan powered down immediately. Aaron followed, hands shaking. Henry scanned the corridor like a soldier who'd walked this terrain in another lifetime. Shadows, blind spots, doors left ajar. His posture shifted, shoulders squared, chin lowered, an old instinct returning. Stay close, he murmured. We're not moving through this unsecured. They headed toward the service elevator, the one only crew used. It was the fastest path to the parking level where airport police were waiting. But halfway there, a janitor's cart rolled out of a side door, pushed by a woman in a blue uniform humming softly. She glanced up, startled at their intensity. Henry nodded politely, masking suspicion. Afternoon? She blinked. Afternoon, Captain. Nothing unusual, nothing off. But as they passed, Aaron whispered, Her badge says, Terminal 2 support. Why is she in a Terminal 3 corridor? Ethan didn't look back. Keep walking. Once in the elevator, Henry jabbed the button for the lower level. As the doors slid shut, Ethan felt Aaron's shoulder brush his, the quiet confirmation that neither of them would survive this without the other. The elevator descended with a groan. The lights flickered once, twice. The car jerked slightly. Aaron tensed. Why are we stopping? Henry scanned the ceiling panel. We're not, it's just... The lights steadied. The elevator resumed, but the interruption chilled all three men. When the doors finally opened to the staff parking mezzanine airport, officers stood waiting, 2 men and a woman, uniforms, crisp expressions alert. One stepped forward. Captain Dawson. Officers Reed and Maddox Denver, airport police. We'll escort you to the hospital. Something in Henry's exhale eased. Good. We leave now. They crossed the mezzanine toward the marked vehicle parked under the sodium lamps. Ethan could see his reflection in the window shoulders, hunched eyes too bright. A man trying to hold his world together with trembling fingers. As Aaron reached for the rear door, Officer Reed lifted a hand. Wait. Before you get in, I need to confirm something. Ethan froze. Aaron frowned. Confirm what? But Reed wasn't looking at them. He was looking at the phone in his hand. The glow of the screen lit his face with sickly blue. He stepped closer to Ethan. Too close. Is this you? He asked. Ethan glanced down. It was the same message he'd received minutes earlier. Your father wasn't the target. You were. except this one had something added. Thanks for cooperating. Ethan's breath vanished. Henry stepped between them. Where did you get that? Reed blinked. Anonymous routing. It came through dispatch. We assumed you sent it. He didn't finish because Ethan grabbed Aaron's arm and said one word. Move! Henry understood instantly. Reed wasn't lying, but someone else was listening, watching, intercepting, and trying to corner them. Ethan scanned the garage's open concrete stretches. Shadows pooled between pillars. The air tasted metallic. Aaron's hand moved unconsciously to his pocket, where the note from their father should have been. Except his eyes widened. Ethan, your jacket. Ethan looked down. The pocket where he had tucked Walter's note was empty. Heat surged through his chest. No. He ripped open the pocket, patting all his seams. Gone. Henry swore under his breath. Someone lifted it off you. Someone close enough on the walk downstairs, Aaron whispered, horrified. That janitor Ethan's mind flashed the cart. The uniform, the humming. The moment they passed her. The casual brush of her elbow against his side. It was her. Henry turned to Officer Maddox. Lock down every corridor between here and Crew Lounge 2. Now! Maddox grabbed his radio and sprinted. Reed chased after him. Henry faced the twins again. Listen carefully. That note wasn't taken for sentiment. It was taken because it means something. Something someone didn't want you to see. Aaron's voice shook. But we saw it. Only part of it. Henry said grimly. If there were more pages, or a code, or a reference, they might think you still have it. Ethan's mind reeled. So they're going to keep coming. They already are. A door slammed across the garage. Hard footsteps echoed too fast, too heavy to be civilians. Henry instinctively pulled the twins behind a concrete pillar. He peeked out. Two figures in staff jackets moved along the far wall, scanning the area with deliberate slowness. Not janitors. Not police. Something in their posture, too erect, too coordinated, exposed their training. Ethan's throat tightened. We need to get out of here. Henry nodded once. Follow me. Quietly. They moved along the shadows of the garage, slipping behind support beams and low concrete barriers. Ethan's heart hammered so loudly he feared it would echo. Aaron whispered, Why would the board come after us? What could Dad have found? Ethan answered without looking back. Whatever it wasn't just dangerous. His hands curled into fists. It was worth killing for. They reached a stairwell door. Henry scanned the area, then shoved it open. As they slipped inside, the stairwell swallowed them in deep grey silence. They descended 2 flights, but halfway down Ethan heard something a soft ping, metal hitting concrete. He froze, looked up. A phone dropped accidentally or deliberately from the level above. Then a voice floated downward, calm and male. Boys, we need to talk. Aaron pressed himself against the wall, breath shaking. They found us. Ethan steadied him. We don't talk. Henry moved in front of them, eyes narrowing with a focus Ethan had never seen. Get behind me. Now. The steps above creaked once, then again. Ethan felt something dark settle into the air. Not fear. Resolve. He leaned close to Aaron. No matter what happens, he whispered, we get to that hospital. Dad tried to hand us the truth, and they tried to take him out before he could. Aaron swallowed. And us. Ethan nodded, voice steel. Which means we're holding something they can't afford to lose. The footsteps grew louder. A shadow appeared on the landing above. Henry braced. The door below them, 4 flights down, burst open with a metallic slam. Another voice. Another set of footsteps. They were surrounded. Ethan closed his eyes for one brief heartbeat, then opened them again, colder. The fight had found them, and they weren't backing down. The stairwell air grew colder as the footsteps closed in from above and below, sealing the Coleman brothers inside a tightening cage of echoing concrete. The fluorescent bulbs overhead flickered with a low, irregular buzz, throwing shadows across the steps that bent and stretched with every movement. Ethan felt the space constrict not from walls, but from intention. Whoever was coming wasn't curious. They were hunting. Henry didn't blink. He didn't panic. He simply shifted his weight 1 foot back, 1 forward, his posture quiet, but unmistakably defensive. The posture of a man who had lived through things he never spoke about in break rooms or training centers. He glanced back at the twins. "When I move, you move. Don't hesitate." Aaron's breath hitched. "Henry, you're not debating," Henry finished sharply. "Stay behind me." The voice above drifted down. Again, smooth coaxing practiced. "Boys, this is a misunderstanding. We can resolve it together." Ethan felt a muscle jump in his jaw. That tone, too polite, too controlled, wasn't an invitation. It was a threat dipped in honey. A second voice rose from the lower level, rougher, as if impatient. "We don't need all three. Just the brothers." Aaron stiffened. Ethan stepped closer to block him instinctively. Henry's eyes flashed. "Change of plan. We're exiting from the maintenance level." "That's down, not up," Ethan said. Henry pointed at the lower landing where the unknown men now ascended. Not the usual exit. And then Ethan saw it, a narrow metal door, paint peeling half-hidden behind a mop sink. No signage, no keypad. A crew-only bypass route. Henry jerked his chin toward it. "When I make space run, don't stop." Before the twins could argue, he moved. Henry Dawson descended the next few steps with controlled aggression, intercepting the 2 men climbing upward. They were dressed as airport engineers' uniforms, crisp boots new, too polished, too intentional. One of them raised a hand in mock reassurance. "Captain Dawson, let's be reasonable." Henry answered with his elbow, sharp, swift, cracking against the man's jaw with a sickening snap. The second lunged, reaching for Henry's collar, but Henry twisted, leveraging gravity and training older than both attackers combined. The man stumbled, slammed into the railing. "Go!" Henry barked. Ethan grabbed Aaron's arm and bolted down the stairs. Footsteps hammered behind them, Henry's and someone else's. Shouts ricocheted up the stairwell, disorienting in the tight walls. Ethan found the metal door and shoved hard. It groaned open to a dark hallway, lit by a single emergency bulb. The smell of dust and machinery hit them instantly. In Ethan hissed. Aaron slipped inside first. Ethan followed and scanned for a lock. None. So he grabbed a nearby steel rod, a broken broom handle, and jammed it through the door's hinge gap, wedging it shut. Footsteps thudded against the opposite side. Hands pounded. "Open it!" "Not happening," Ethan muttered, pulling Aaron deeper into the hallway. The maintenance corridor stretched endlessly pipes, snaking overhead like exposed veins. Water dripped steadily somewhere, echoing through the emptiness. The hum of generators vibrated through the floor. Aaron's voice shook. "Ethan, they wanted us alive." For now, Ethan said grimly, "That's not comfort." Another slam from the door behind them. "Keep moving," Ethan ordered. They ran, breath echoing off cement walls. The hallway bent left, then right, narrowing, until they reached a chain-linked barrier, separating the corridor from a massive electrical room, humming with airport power. A padlock hung from the gate. Aaron grabbed it. Great. Locked, Ethan pulled the steel rod from his pocket. It wasn't much, but it was long enough. He wedged it through the lock's shackle, braced his knee, and pushed. The metal shrieked. Again, Aaron urged. Ethan pushed with everything he had. The metal groaned, bent, then burst the lock, snapping open and falling to the floor. They slipped inside and shut the gate behind them, though it wouldn't hold long. The electrical room was vast rows of transformers, humming with deep bass. Red lights blinked in slow, rhythmic pulses. A catwalk ran above them, leading to another maintenance exit on the far wall. Aaron pointed. There. But Ethan wasn't looking at the exit. He was staring at a figure standing in the shadows behind the transformers. Someone was already here. Aaron followed his gaze. Ethan. The figure stepped forward, slowly revealing a familiar face. Linda Bradford. Her uniform was disheveled-haired, loose from its bun, a streak of dust across her cheek. She looked as if she'd been running, hiding, surviving. "What are you doing here?" Ethan demanded. Linda lifted her hands, palms open. "I didn't follow you. I've been hiding since you left the waiting room." Aaron's eyes narrowed. From who her voice trembled? From them. Ethan's pulse surged. "You said the board was involved. Which member? Give us a name." She hesitated too long. "That's not something I can—" A loud crash erupted from the hallway outside. They had breached the maintenance door. Linda flinched violently, eyes snapping toward the sound. "They're coming!" Aaron grabbed her arm. "You know more than you've said. Our father is in the hospital because of this. People out there are armed. Tell us the truth." Her breathing quickened. "If I talk, I'm dead." Ethan stepped closer, gaze hard as iron. "You're dead if you don't." Her eyes glistened. Finally, her resistance cracked. "It wasn't just one board member," she whispered. "It was 3. And they weren't after your father." She looked at Ethan. Only Ethan. "They were after you." The hallway thundered with footsteps. They were close. Too close. Aaron didn't understand. Why him? Why Ethan? Linda swallowed. "Because your father made a mistake 22 years ago." She turned to Ethan. "A mistake involving you." Ethan felt the floor tilt beneath him. "What mistake?" Linda shook her head desperately. "He hid something. Something the board has been searching for all these years. And they believe it didn't die with him." She pointed straight at Ethan's chest. "They believe it's in you." Before Ethan could speak, a roar exploded as the hallway door slammed open and heavy boots stormed into the electrical room. Henry appeared on the catwalk above, blood on his sleeve, voice booming. "Run!" The lights flickered. The air turned electric, and Ethan realized the truth. Whatever Walter Coleman hid 22 years ago, whatever he tried to protect, whatever he tried to warn them about, it wasn't just a document. It wasn't just evidence. It wasn't just a secret. It was a key. And Ethan, whether he wanted it or not, was the lock it fit. Sirens washed the night in pulses of red and blue as Ethan stepped out of the hospital's sliding doors and into the cold air. The world outside felt too still, too orderly, too unaware of everything that had unraveled in the past 12 hours. The city lights shimmered across the windshield of parked patrol cars, but none of it touched him. His thoughts were fixed on the man lying unconscious 2 floors above, a breathing silhouette, surrounded by humming machines. Walter Coleman. The father he thought he knew, the man who raised him with calm words and steady principles. A man who never once hinted he was carrying a secret large enough to fracture an empire. Aaron emerged behind him, arms crossed tightly shoulders, shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. Henry followed, speaking quietly to two detectives near the entrance, voices low-clipped strategic. Linda stood several yards away under a street lamp, isolated, pale, exhausted. Officers watched her closely. She didn't try to run. She didn't even glance their way. She just stared at the ground, as if her shadow alone held the truth she'd been too afraid to tell. Ethan inhaled deeply and stepped farther into the parking lot, letting the cool air scrape against his lungs. He needed space. He needed a moment where no alarms were ringing, no footsteps chased him, no voices whispered threats disguised as warnings. But the moment his eyes lifted, he saw someone standing at the far edge of the lot, a silhouette near the line of trees. A man. Motionless, watching. His heart jerked, adrenaline surging white-hot. Aaron followed his gaze. "Ethan, what is it?" But when Ethan blinked, the figure stepped backward, swallowed by darkness. Gone. Ethan exhaled hard. Nothing. Maybe nothing. Aaron didn't believe him, but neither had strength left to investigate shadows in the fog. They walked toward the benches near the emergency entrance. The cold metal stung through their uniforms. Around them, police officers moved with urgency, speaking into radios scanning the hospital perimeter. Even here, even with law enforcement surrounding them, Ethan felt the invisible thread still tightening. Henry joined them, his expression heavier than before. They traced the two men from the stairwell, he said. Airport employees on paper. Fake credentials. Nothing in the system to identify who hired them. Aaron cursed under his breath. So they could walk right up to us again. "Not tonight," Henry said. "Security's airtight. But this isn't over." Ethan lifted his chin. "It will end when my father wakes up." Henry hesitated. "Ethan, there's something you should prepare for. Doctors are concerned." His heart took significant stress. They don't know if he'll regain full consciousness. The words didn't hit all at once. They seeped in, slow and sharp, cutting from the inside. Aaron lowered his head into his hands. He survived combat zones. He survived that board trying to run him out of the industry. He survived raising us alone. He's a fighter. Ethan stared at the hospital windows. And he'll survive this too. Henry didn't argue. He simply rested a hand on Ethan's shoulder, the gesture brief but grounding, then stepped away to speak with detectives again. A soft voice came from behind them. "I didn't tell you everything." "Linda." Aaron shot to his feet instantly. "Don't." Ethan reached out, stopping him. Linda approached cautiously, hands clasped in front of her eyes, rimmed red. She looked stripped of every layer she'd used to armor herself in the crew cabin. No authority, no sharp tone. Just a middle-aged woman, holding something too heavy for her conscience to lift any longer. "I'm not your enemy," she said softly. "I know how it looks. But you need to understand why I stayed quiet." Aaron's voice was jagged. "You let them near him." "I didn't know what they wanted," Linda said quickly. "I only knew they were watching him. Watching you." The board had changed over the years. New faces, new agendas. People with enough influence to hide decisions that should have been impossible. Ethan's voice was cold. "What decisions?" Linda swallowed deeply. "Your father was part of an investigation 22 years ago. A secret one. Something happened during certification trials for the old Liberty West fleet. A malfunction covered up by company leadership at the time. Several engineers rejected the cover-up. One died in what they called an accident. Another vanished. Your father tried to expose it. And someone used the evidence he gathered against him." Aaron stiffened. "What malfunction?" Linda shook her head. "I don't know. I was still junior then. But whatever it was, he wasn't supposed to walk away with proof. And now the same people or their successors think that proof is inside something only your father told you, or left for you. Ethan thought of the missing note, the stolen message, the cryptic warning. Protect the files. Trust no one on the board. Remember Denver. He whispered the words aloud without meaning to. They carried the weight of a man who knew he didn't have much time left. A man who had carried fear in silence, so his children would not inherit it. Aaron's voice trembled. So they're afraid of what Dad knows? No, Linda corrected gently. They're afraid of what you know now. Ethan felt a slow realization settle through him, heavy and unwelcome. Someone thinks we're holding the key. Linda nodded. And they'll keep coming until they're sure you don't. Before she could say another word, a detective approached. Mr. Coleman, your father's condition has stabilized. He's unconscious, but breathing on his own. Relief broke through the tension like a crack of sunlight. Aaron sagged forward in his seat. Ethan closed his eyes, letting air finally move through him. Can we see him? Ethan asked. In a moment, the detective replied, There's something you need to hear first. Your father woke briefly during the transfer to ICU. He said one sentence. Ethan felt himself rise without thinking. What did he say? The detective looked directly into his eyes. He said, Tell my sons to open the vault. Aaron frowned. Vault? What vault? The detective lowered his voice. He didn't say, but he repeated it 3 times before losing consciousness again. Ethan felt the world shift beneath him, as if the ground itself recognized the meaning even before he did. A vault. Something hidden. Something protected. Something powerful enough that 3 board members might destroy everything to reach it. Linda whispered horror creeping into her voice. He kept it hidden all these years. He kept it alive. Aaron looked at Ethan, voice cracking. Do you know what he meant? Ethan swallowed his heartbeat, thundering. Yes, he said, quietly. I do. Aaron searched his brother's eyes. Ethan, what's in that vault? Ethan stared at the hospital window, jaw tightening, realization sharpening into resolve. Everything they tried to bury. The detective gestured toward the IHU hallway. Come, he may not wake again tonight, but you should be with him. Ethan and Aaron followed Linda, trailing behind, at a respectful distance, Henry falling into step beside them like a silent sentinel. As they reached the ICU doors, Ethan paused and looked back toward the darkness outside the parking lot. That shadow might still be out there, watching, waiting. He straightened his shoulders. Whatever secrets his father left behind were no longer dormant. The danger wasn't fading. It was rising. But this time they weren't stepping into it blindly. They were stepping toward the truth. And as the elevator doors slid shut, Ethan whispered a promise to the empty space between floors. No more running. Thank you for staying with this journey. If the story moved, you hit like subscribe for the next chapter and comment 3 words, find the truth.